So we had seen in the last lecture that the second derivative of f at A is a linear map from Rn to linear maps from Rn to Rk, and this is canonically isomorphic to the space of bilinear maps from Rn to Rk. So the second derivative of a function f from Rn to Rk can be thought of in two ways. It can be thought of as a linear map from Rn to linear maps from Rn to Rk, or as a bilinear map from Rn to Rk. So what does this particularly mean as in the case when k is equal to 1? So what happens if k is equal to 1? So that means, first of all, what happens in the case of the first derivative? So derivative, that means f is a map from Rn to R to the 1. In this case, the first derivative of f at A is a linear map from Rn to R. And we already know that all linear maps from Rn to R are in fact given by an inner product. Rn to R can be linear maps from Rn to R can be identified with Rn. In which way? So, if T then we can represent T by there exists a Z in Rn such that T of x is equal to inner product. So for all, every linear map is given by inner product against something. In particular, this derivative of f at A, which is a linear map from Rn to R. So this Z is this element here. T is supposed to be this linear map here. I can express this linear map in terms of T of x is inner product of x and z. I should be slightly careful here. I should put this here. And what is inner product of x and z? It is summation xi times zi I equal to 1 to n. This is the inner product that we had talked about earlier, the Euclidean inner product. In particular, this says that i.e. df A acting on x is equal to the inner product of x with z. Because every linear map from Rn to R is given by an inner product against something, and that quantity I will call z. So this z is something that you had come across earlier, and you should be able to show in an exercise that z in terms of partials z is equal to the matrix, the row vector df by dx1 df by dx1, df by dxn at A, and there's a notation that you had come across for this. The notation you had used is, this is equal to grad f at A, and you had also used the notation grad f at A. So the gradient is in fact gradient of a function is the z, and that is telling you what the linear map is. And what is this linear map? Let me write it out. This is summation xi zi, summation xi zi I equal to 1 to n. Note that this term that we have here is linear in the z. What are the zi's? The zi's are the components of z. So I should write here z is equal to z1 zn. So the gradient in fact is the representation of the linear map f in terms of the inner product. The same thing is going to work in infinite dimensions. So let's just think now about the second derivative. So the gradient is in fact this df at a at z is equal to inner product of x with z, which is what I had written down. Now, what happens in the case of the second derivative? Again, this is the case when k is equal to 1. So notice that the second derivative of f at a is in the space Rn to linear maps from Rn to Rk. And k equal to 1, so this is linear maps from Rn to R1. The space of linear maps from Rn to R1, I just explained, is that isomorphic to Rn. So d2f at a is a linear map from Rn to Rn. And you know that linear maps from Rn to Rn are represented by a n by n matrix. So what does that n by n matrix look like? So you should be able to prove that d2f at a should be a bilinear map from Rn to R. Okay? So it should tell you what you do at two vectors h and k. Where are h and k? H and k are in Rn and Rn. So h has components h1 dot 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 up to hn. K has components k1 dot 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 up to kn. So you should be able to prove that this particular thing, this whole thing now is a real number. And the exercise is that you should be able to prove that d2f at a evaluated at hk is given by that expression. We are going to be playing around with these kind of expressions for a long time. And you should be able to show that that expression on the right hand side is in fact linear in h when k is fixed, and it is linear in k when h is fixed. So in fact it is a bilinear map on Rn. So this matrix is something that you probably have come across earlier. The name that you're giving to this matrix is called the Hessian. It's called the Hessian of f at a. In the same way, you should be able to prove that this is what the second order derivative is for a function from Rn. So let me write here k is equal to 1. in the same way, you should be able to prove that matrix representation of D3F at A. Now I should be slightly careful of what I mean by this matrix representation. This is not a nice expression to use. But we can think of it as some kind of matrix, but what kind of matrix it is something that we have to think about. So let me not write the matrix D3F at A, D3F at A. This is a trilinear map on Rn. And therefore I should evaluate it at three vectors. I will call those vectors H, K, and L. Where are each of these vectors? Each of these vectors are in Rn. And this thing that I write down on the right hand side should be a number. What number should it be? So in exact analogy with the case when you have the second derivative, which is the exact analogy of what you do in the case of the first derivative, you should be able to write down that this is equal to sum. What? Three derivatives of f, d3f by dxi, dxj, dxs, evaluated at A, then hi, k, j, and ls, sum I, j, and s equal to 1 to n. And you must verify that this thing that I've written on the right hand side is in fact a trilinear map of H, K, and L. When K and L are fixed, it's linear in H. When H and L are fixed, it's linear in K. And when H and K are fixed, it is linear in N. Okay? And once you have this idea straight, you will be able to write down what every nth derivative is. So this, now you see this quantity that I'm writing down here, this quantity is not a matrix. It has three indices. But that is what corresponds to the Hessian for the second derivative. Okay? And it turns out that each of these terms are important as it stands. So in the case when k is equal to 1, all the matrices involved, or all the multilinear maps, in fact, come with coefficients which are just the partial derivatives of a. What happens when k is not equal to 1 is something which I think I'd left as an exercise at some time, but anyway, we'll see that in a little while. Very good. What is even more interesting is that what we are talking about, the gradient of a function from Rn to R, there's an exact analogy that is also true in infinite dimensions. So we are taking a function f, so let H is a Hilbert space. For those of you who don't know what a Hilbert space is, don't worry too much about it. It is something for which you have an inner product. And the norm coming from the inner product is complete. Whatever that means. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. Okay? So there's a theorem which says that every t, if t from H to C is a some reason I have to use bounded, whatever that means, then there exists a unique such that t of x is equal to x with z. This is the inner product. This theorem is one of the central theorems in functional analysis. It's called the Riesz representation, called the Riesz theorem. This is exactly analogous to the statement that if you are a linear map from Rn to R, then there exists a Z such that T of x is equal to inner product of x and z. So, if phi is any map from the Hilbert space to C, is some band. I'd given you one example of this earlier. The example we had earlier was phi of u is equal to norm of u squared. So phi of u is equal to norm of u squared was one example that we had talked about earlier. So if phi is from here, then we say that phi is differentiable and phi is differentiable at A, then the derivative of phi at A is a linear map from H to C. Remember, phi need not be a linear map. This is not a linear map of U. But the derivative of phi at a point A in H is a linear map from here to here. Therefore, by the Riesz theorem, we'll have that there exists a Z in H such that D phi at A acting on Z. A is in H. Z is in H. This is given by inner product. Sorry, I have made a mistake here. I should not call it Z. I should call it. So let me write this out again. I should say that D phi at A evaluated at some point in H. So the point in H that I will take is X. This is in H. This is in H. Is equal to the inner product of X and Z. In finite dimensions are called Z. Z was called the gradient. In infinite dimensions, the Z is also the gradient, but it is not called the gradient. Z is called the, so let me erase this here. It's called the functional derivative of u phi with respect to u in H, and the notation that is used is that, so notation is that Z is equal to, this is notation, delta phi by delta u at A. So Z is the functional derivative of phi with respect to u, and the notation is that, see, I hope you understand that delta u, I can't write d phi by du, because u itself is an element in the Hilbert space. So what do I mean by du? That is a question that arises there. The notation is that delta phi by delta u at A is the Z. The Z is d phi at A acting on X is the inner product between X and Z. So this is the functional derivative of phi with respect to u. Now it turns out this notion of functional derivative is very central and quite important in very large areas of mathematics, and not just mathematics, it is also central to very large areas of modern day physics. So functional derivatives is a term you may probably have not heard earlier. But you must understand that functional derivatives are just gradients. And they play a very central role in what is called Hamiltonian mechanics in lots and lots of different areas in physics and mathematics. And those of you who are interested can think about, or at least look up, what is called those of you who are interested can think about what is called look at what is called the Hamiltonian structure of the Korteweg-de Vries equation. This is one place where functional derivatives are very centrally used. In fact, they're used in anything to do with Hamiltonian structures in infinite dimensions. If you don't understand what I'm saying here, don't worry too much about it. But the point is that gradients, in fact, turn out to be quite important in various different areas of mathematics and physics, and in particular when one is talking about Hamiltonian structures. So just those of you who are interested should look at that, and let's see what happens afterwards. We'll stop here.